Welcome to Clark County Today. I'm your host, David Medor. Our guest today is Kevin Peterson. Kevin, you are, in my own paraphrase words here, are a forensic design expert. Is that a fair description of what you do?
Well, not exactly, but in this case it probably is. I'm an architect, planner, and I'm travel the world helping communities and cities piece together transit and transportation.
So you have plenty of experience, you have a lot of expertise. You would be considered an expert when it comes to design, bridge design. And the reason, what we're going to talk about here is your role in evaluating and comparing the CRC design compared to what you have as offered as an alternative, some kind of an evaluation from a third-party expert.
Oh, yes. In fact, what you see on the screen here is a comparison of what I discovered might be possible for this crossing and contrasted in what you see in red, which is what the CRC project office is currently proposing for this crossing. But let me back up a little bit, David.
Okay.
What I do is help communities discover how best to integrate transportation improvements into those communities. I've traveled the world helping communities deal with some very complicated projects and some very complicated urban landscapes. And a couple years ago I was helping City of Portland with a couple of projects they had for bridges, and a number of designers in that community asked me if I would take a look at what's being proposed for the Columbia River crossing. And I indicated that I would take a look at it, and if I saw that what was being proposed by the two departments of transportation was a valid approach to the project, that, well, I would support the project. So venturing into it, I wanted to, first of all, ask myself if I thought that the project as a replacement project for the bridge made sense.
Good question to ask.
And my conclusion was, yes, it probably does make sense to, at some point, replace that bridge. As you know, the first bridge was built before the war, and it was using technologies that were beginning to be leaned out a little bit by our engineers, and there are a number of deficiencies and substructure problems that probably force us in the future to replace the bridges. So
an upgrade would naturally be in order.
Yeah, we need to do something. And it may not be that we do it this year or next year, but in the short run, relative to how long cities live, it needs to be done, absolutely. And then the next question I ask myself is did the departments of transportation come up with the correct, what I call fit for function? And that's the most perplexing question. And it leads one to understand how the roadways are laid over the landscape, the function of those roadways, how they coexist within the urban environment, how you fit the complexity of an urban freeway and two bridge crossings into a very, very tight, little over a mile section of I-5. And then you have to do that in such a way that you keep the freeway operating and viable during the time of the fix.
That transition
period. So I ventured into the project and went to the website of the project, which is a wonderful website. It's rich with material and gives one a good appreciation of what the project engineers were having to deal with when they designed the project. And you mentioned forensic. Mm-hmm. The one thing that we have the advantage of when we look back at what people did is we can more easily and clearly see what might have been done differently. So that notion of forensic is appropriate. We learn by what other people have discovered. And through the benefit of hindsight, we can ask ourselves, is there not a better way to fit the function onto this landscape?
So you were able to take a look at what was proposed, what the plans were, and compare that to evaluate the appropriateness of that solution. How well does that fit? How well does that solve the problem? And
keep in mind that I came into this look by a group of designers who were not really happy with what they saw as the output from the CRC project office. So I went looking at it with an eye towards simplifying, making safer, ideally saving money, and making a much nicer bridge that the community would be proud of over a longer period of time. So I ventured into the background material on the project and I discovered a couple things that I thought were more interesting. First is the misapplication of FAA glide slope criteria from Pearson Field. As best as I can determine, the project was using, I don't want to be technical with you, but a ILS approach glide slope for a precision landing within the glide slope criteria put forward for Pearson Field, which is a utility runway that has a non-precision instrument approach. Well, a non-precision instrument approach to a utility runway requires a 20-to-1 glide slope. I thought, well, why is the project using a different lower glide slope? Checked with the city, checked with the airport. Their master plans, both for the airport and the city, require 20-to-1 glide slope. So imagine this. Buildings are being built around the airport with a 20-to-1 glide slope, but for some reason the freeway was being designed to a different glide slope.
Okay, let me just see if I can translate that or summarize what you just said. We have an adjacent airport, Pearson Airport, located right near that bridge, that
Yes,
freeway.
Very close.
And as airplanes approach or they take off from that runway, they either need to go up 1 foot for every 20 feet or they need to go up 1 foot for every 34 feet. That's your glide slope.
That was the basic choices that
Okay, and that has everything to do with where you place the bridge.
Well, and if you have a 20-to-1 glide slope and you're trying to put a bridge between, in this case, a glide slope and the upper portion of the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad clearance envelope, you have a little tiny opportunity.
So on our side of the river, on the Vancouver side of the river, we have that railroad tracks that are elevated
Yes.
above the freeway. Freeway actually goes underneath it, right?
Yeah.
And so if we're going to put a bridge that is not a lift bridge, it's actually up in the air, we're going to have to go on the top of that, which means we are creeping up into some airspace there. And the question is, I guess the design, as it was constrained, artificially constrained, said, well, we need to stay way below that. But in reality, there's more leeway there.
Well, the assumptions that I was able to deduce, and I'm not absolutely certain because I really wasn't able to find a good train of thought there, is that the project designers thought that they needed to put the bridge lower than the lower glide slope, but above the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad, which created a window that was very narrow and forced them basically to say the only thing we can do is have a wide, expansive freeway deck that hits between the rock and the hard place. And I discovered that if the correct glide slope criteria had been applied, it creates a little bigger window. And it suggested to me that, okay, it wasn't then an obligation to have a single deck with all the lanes of traffic on, but you could actually stack the freeway. I thought that was interesting. So I began to explore a little bit more. And let's take time out and I'll show you another image if I could.
All right, we'll pause here for a minute while we pull up another image.
So David, on the screen here, you see the lane configuration that the CRC project office was having to cope with. And that's too many interchanges, too close together, and two bridges within a very short length of the freeway. And what they had to do, since they felt obligated to have a single bridge level, was to have flanking lanes, what we see in green, blue, and red here, that basically had to widen the bridge because of all the merging of traffic in and out of the freeway. So essentially what the project office realized is that we have to expand the number of lanes so that we can account for this merging, essentially collector-distributor lanes along the side of the freeway.
So because they constrain themselves to a single level that has to carry all the traffic, they're still making a multi-level. There's the bottom level is supposed to carry pedestrians and light rail.
Oh, sure. So it's three-dimensional, yes.
Yes,
but we're talking only about the freeway,
Yep.
which is a concern to us in freeway design with these interchanges because they're so close to one another. They basically lay over the landscape a tremendous amount of what we call rampway spaghetti, which, as we've seen in what they've been proposing, is essentially a good portion of Hayden Island and really occupies the front door of Vancouver with respect to the river, overlaid with freeways and ramps. So the notion of a single level freeway in which all the traffic, shore to shore, local traffic, interstate movement, fast movements between cities, it all has to coexist within a freeway deck, forces it to be wider and much more expansive and land hungry when you apply that over an urban situation.
And is all this as a result of that original glide slope you talked about?
More or less, but remember they could have put a two-level bridge on a straight alignment or side-by-side bridge, but it would have extended into Fort Vancouver. It would have taken park land to do that. So that was not an attractive option. We jealously guard our parks. In fact, as a young architect, I participated in a RUDAT study of Fort Vancouver, in which in the early 1970s we determined it was a place of regional historic, national historic importance, and set the mechanisms in place to help preserve that.
So we want to preserve the Fort Vancouver. You don't want to
Absolutely.
encroach into that
Absolutely.
area. But we also want to be able to make sure that we meet the FAA requirements when it comes to the glide slope. But that fundamental constraint that said that
the glide slope constraint and the ability and the perceived need to put additional lanes onto the shoulder resulted in the design that we see before us.
which became very complicated.
Well, we're talking about $3.6 billion for a section of road with two significant river crossings. One is the North Portland Harbor and the other is the Columbia River. Very, very complicated, very, very expensive solution that's been put forward to build this.
And the footprint that it takes across Hayden Island, it just...
Well, from my point of view, it takes Hayden Island off the map relative to a viable urban place for people to live and work. It's an expanse now of freeway.
It consumes it.
Consumes it. And to me, that's a tragedy, because we're committed to a light rail system that will place a station there. So what will the station serve? A few people, yes. But does it serve enough people to be relevant? Now, I deal with transit systems around the world. We build transit around the world and put stations into communities when they have ridership in, say, 300, 400, 500 people in the peak hour. I'm afraid that the light rail investment on Hayden Island will be undermined because it will be measured in use of maybe a dozen or 2 dozen people during the peak hour. It may be substantially more than that, but it certainly isn't hundreds and hundreds of people per hour. So I look at what's being proposed as essentially gutting the heart and soul of both Vancouver along the waterfront and Hayden Island to be viable, effective places in our urban environment that can be productive for future generations.
So the impact of the current design has some very significant drawbacks to it.
Well, I knew that, and I knew that it's one thing to look at a design solution put forward and ridicule it, but I also knew in my heart that in this case, because of the time and effort that many people have spent struggling with the issues and trying to come up with an acceptable design, that in order for people to know that there truly was a difference and prove to myself that walking the talk was possible relative to lesser impacts, less costly, more viable, more attractive crossing would require that I demonstrate an alternative.
So you looked at the current design, consumes the heart and soul of Vancouver and Hayden Island, and you asked yourself the question, this is very complicated, is there a simpler, less impactful way to do it? And what did you end up with?
And I discovered, yes, there is a much simpler way of doing it. That's a much more elegant structure.
And the cost?
And its cost, as best as I can determine, is anywhere between $500 and $500 million and $750 million less than what's being proposed.
Less. So it's simpler and lower cost.
And I think it consumes something like 22 fewer city blocks in downtown Vancouver and Hayden Island.
More or less?
Less.
In other words, there is an alternative design. Can you show, that's the first one you looked at. So what we have here in the red is the original design, as proposed now.
As proposed last winter, I believe. So it's essentially
close
the same.
to the original design.